Hey guys, welcome to Linux Mate. Thank you for watching. Today's video is going to be something a little different. We're going to be going back to our Unix roots and installing FreeBSD. FreeBSD is not Linux. It is a full Unix-like operating system that descended directly from the old BSD Unix from Berkeley. So since BSD Unix had its roots in the original AT&T Unix, the BSD operating systems are about as close as we can get today to the original Unix. This video is going to cover how to install FreeBSD using the ZFS file system, a fully encrypted disk, Xorg, and the XFCE desktop. Today's video is not a comprehensive look at FreeBSD. That's a topic for its own video series. But for those of you who are new to FreeBSD, I'd like to take a minute to talk about what it is. So FreeBSD, as I said, it was a Unix operating system that behaves in a manner similar to Linux, but there are some key differences that I'd like to quickly highlight. The first of which is that FreeBSD is a whole operating system, not just a kernel. So FreeBSD is developed as a complete system. All of the tools are provided in the base system, such as shells, utilities, compilers, etc., and they're all developed together. So everything you need for a full operating system is in base and is part of the same code base. And FreeBSD includes a first-class implementation of ZFS file system, and that's built into the system. This provides awesome features such as snapshotting and things. It's very robust, very configurable file system, and FreeBSD has awesome support for ZFS. FreeBSD includes a port system with over 31,000 applications and packages. This is similar to a repository on Linux. You can compile the applications both from source as well as install them from binary packages. So that's a very flexible system as well. The Gen 2 package build system was heavily inspired by the FreeBSD system. So FreeBSD is released under the permissive BSD license. Unlike Linux, that's released under the GNU public license, the BSD license does not require individuals to send changes back to the original project. You can, based on the license, package up a version of BSD, make changes, close the source, release it, and sell it, and that does not violate the license. You only have to give credit to the original authors. And one last point, although you can get GNU tools on FreeBSD, the base system itself includes its own implementation of core utilities. It includes the Clang C compiler, and so there's no GNU in the base system, but you can install things like GNU Bash and Nano and whatnot from ports, or as binary packages if you'd like. And just a couple of additional points. As we said before, nearly 31,000 applications available in the binary packages and ports collection. So if most of the software that you're familiar with and used to using on Linux will also be available on FreeBSD. And while there are many similarities between Linux and FreeBSD, because Linux was inspired by Unix, they're still very different. These differences presents a much steeper learning curve than switching to another Linux distribution, even something like Arch or Gentoo. The challenge isn't really necessarily in the installation piece of it. It is the fact that the system works differently than Linux does. You have a different init system. You have the configuration files are located in different places. They're just different configuration files. The way you configure the system is very different. And it's the way you access devices. Not the way, but the naming conventions for the devices are also very different between Linux and Unix. So it's definitely more of a challenge, or more to learn moving to FreeBSD than moving from one Linux distribution to another, including like Arch and Gentoo. But it's a learning experience that will make you a better Linux user. So having said that, let's get into the install. You can get FreeBSD from the freebsd.org website, or just do a Google search for FreeBSD download, and it should take you to the right place. Just write this ISO image to a USB stick and boot it up. Today we're going to be installing in a VirtualBox, just for the ease of recording this video, but these same steps will work on a compatible desktop or laptop computer. So I actually just finished installing my a fresh FreeBSD 12.1 install on my ThinkPad X220. It's actually running amazingly, and use this exact same process. So, but we will be using VirtualBox today. So here we are in VirtualBox and ready to install FreeBSD. We will select the first option, which is to boot the multi-user environment. This will allow us to proceed with the install. And as you can see, the output from a FreeBSD boot process looks like Linux did a while back before systemd. So welcome to FreeBSD. We would like to begin a new installation. And you can select your keyboard key map if you don't, if the default one doesn't work for you, but it does for me, so I will select it. And I will give this a host name. Actually, maybe it should be BSD mate. There we go. And these are optional components that you can install. The kernel debugger and the 32-bit compatibility libraries are selected by default. That's fine for now. I generally install the ports tree and the system source tree as well, but they're certainly not necessary. Most people probably won't want them. And so the next step is to select the partition to install, but really this is where we select the file system. We can either do guided disk setup, which will do a UFS disk install with auto partitioning up here, and that's the legacy file system format. And but we want to use ZFS, and ZFS comes with quite a few advantages, and it also makes it easy to encrypt, so we don't even have to hop to the prompt and set up encryption that way. So we can just go in here and turn the encrypt disk on. We are using GPT, and 2 gigabytes of swap is fine. And I don't necessarily need to encrypt my swap or mirror my swap. So I can go up and proceed with the installation. And this option here, the virtual device type, this is the part of the ZFS configuration. All these other options here are RAID and mirroring options, which would be useful if you have more than one drive that you're going to merge into one ZFS file system. But since we are just using a single disk, we are going to go with Stripe and no redundancy. And now we select the disk that we would like to install on, and it is ADA 0. That is similar to like SDA 0 in Linux. Actually, I think this would be VDA because it's VirtualBox in Linux, but as you can see, the device names are different. And are we sure we want to destroy the current contents of the disk? Yes, we are. And so we need to select a passphrase for the disk encryption. This isn't an account password. This is just the key that you have to enter before boot in order to unlock the disk. So you enter that and then re-enter it, and it will initialize the encryption. And once that's done, it will fetch files and then extract those files to disk. And one thing that you'll notice is that the FreeBSD installation process, the installation process of all the 3 major BSDs, FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and NetBSD, are all very, very quick. They're very, very fast. For one thing, they're not installing a ton of stuff. They're not installing Xorg by default, that sort of thing. And they're also not they're not doing a lot of fancy stuff. That's left up to you to do. And basically, it's just unpacking tarballs into your file system. So next, it will ask us for the root password, and so we'll give it a nice root password here and have to type it to confirm. And next is the configuration of our network device. EM0 is normally the network device for wired Ethernet. If you have a wireless card and you're installing this on a laptop, like on my ThinkPad, for example, it will come up with another device for the Wi-Fi as well, as long as it has firmware support for that Wi-Fi device. So I'm going to select EM0, and I would like to configure IPv4 for this interface, because we do want to use the internet, and then we also want to use DHCP to configure the interface, which is generally what you're going to want to do to configure the internet and your network. So would I like to configure IPv6? No. And for search, it's got my LAN DNS here, but I'm going to go ahead and add the Google DNS server there, just in case we need it. And then we select our time zone, and I'm in Australia. And in Queensland. So you select the appropriate country and location for you. And I'm going to skip this. This looks fine. Skip the time. That looks fine as well. And then this option here is for system configuration. You can enable specific daemons services by default, and secure shell is enabled by default. Dump dev, which will dump crashes to var/var/crash. Those are both good ones to have, and I will enable mouse D as well. And let's go ahead and synchronize system and network time as well. So then we can press enter to proceed, and then you have this option for system hardening. And system hardening is really just some options that the FreeBSD team has come up with that are recommendations for things you might want to consider doing to increase the security of your system. Certainly, if you're running a system that requires a high level of security, you can enable some of these features by default. You don't have to make those decisions now. You can enable these later as well. And we are just going to skip it. And would I like to add a user besides root? And the answer for that question is yes. And I will create a user account for myself. And I can leave that empty. The group. Now, when you're setting up the groups, you want to add yourself to the wheel group. That will allow you to use like sudo and do as commands that allow you to run commands with elevated privileges. And also add video if you want to install Xorg, just to give your account permission to do that. And the login class is default. We'll use the default shell, the default home directory, the default permissions. We do want to use password authentication. We do not want a blank password, and we do not want a random password. So I will specify the password and re-enter it for confirmation. And I do not want to lock out this account. And yes, I do accept those options. And no, I do not want to create another user. So that is the installation for FreeBSD. Now, when we restart this machine, it's going to boot into a text-based environment. So we still have some work to do before we have a working desktop. But let's restart this. And FreeBSD is booting for the first time. So I will start off by logging in as root. And there's some setup that we need to do before we can install Xorg. So the first thing I want to do is to update the system. And we do that by using two separate mechanisms. The first is to update the base system. And the base system is updated through a tool called FreeBSD update. And there are two separate commands that we needed to perform. And the first is fetch to download the updates, and the second is install. We can do a FreeBSD update fetch and a FreeBSD update install separately, and that will work, but you can also do it as one command. So this process will go through and inspect your system and determine what updates need to be applied to the base system that were available since the 12.1 ISO was released. So now it's finished inspecting the system, and now it's preparing to download files. And it should tell us very shortly just how many patches there are to download. Since this process will take a little while, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. All right, now the updates have been installed, so I'm going to go ahead and reboot the system one more time. This will allow all those changes to take effect. So we're going to log in as root once again. And the first thing we want to do is run the pkg update command. And this will fetch and install the latest package management tools. And also it will pull down the latest packages, latest package names, and to basically initialize the package management system that will allow us to install further software, which we do need to do if we want a full desktop environment. The package management, from an end user perspective, if you use binary packages in FreeBSD, it feels very similar to using a command line package manager in Linux. So now that our repositories are up to date, we can install some packages. So I want to do a pkg install, and I want Xorg. I want the XFCE desktop. I want Vim. We need a browser, so we'll do Firefox. And I'm going to do the I'll do the Slim display manager to give us a login screen, graphical login screen. And then I also want DoAs. And DoAs is a simpler replacement for sudo. And this is going to be quite a large install. As you can see, it says it will require over 2 gigabytes of space, 486 megabytes of download. So do I want to proceed? Yes. And it will go through and download all of these packages, all 369 of them, and install them. So this will take quite some time. And so I am going to stop the video and come back when it's complete. So now that we've got the software installed, we need to make a couple of additional changes before we reboot, just to get everything set up the way we need. So first of all, we are going to edit the file, etc rc.conf. This is the main FreeBSD configuration file. And we want to add several things to this file. The first one we want to add is the dbus enable equals yes. And we want to add hld enable, there's the hardware abstraction layer, equals yes. And then I'm going to comment this one out, but in case you want it later, I'm just showing you this. You can add slim.enable, actually slim_enable equals yes. And if that were uncommented, then when you start the system, the graphical environment will boot up directly instead of booting you into the console. But we want to boot into the console for now, so we will leave that commented out. So those are the 3 lines you need to add to the rc.conf file. So we will just save those. And then we need to make a couple of additional modifications. The first of which is we need to set up DoAs. And so I will copy the file user local etc doas.conf.sample to user local etc doas.conf. And now I'm going to edit that file. One thing that's nice about doas is it's the configuration for it is very, very simple. As you can see here, the first thing we're going to leave in is permit wheel, which should allow any user who's a member of the wheel group to perform actions as root. And I don't need this stuff here, so I'm going to remove it all, and then I'm going to go ahead and give my account explicit root access as well. So that's the changes to doas.conf. Just permit wheel, and then permit your username at root as root. And one more quick change before we go. I'm going to log in with my account, and I'm going to edit the file called xinitrc.xinitrc, and just add one line to it, which is exec start XFCE4. And this script, the xinitrc, is ran when an end user runs startx to start the graphical environment. So I believe that is everything. So let's try giving it a reboot. As you can see, doas is definitely working. So this will boot back to the command prompt. And this time I will log in as my normal user. So let's see. And now we should be able to go into Xorg. So we'll just do start X. And as you can see, we get a lovely XFCE desktop. It's very minimal right now because we don't have a whole lot installed, but got a dark theme here if you like dark themes. It's got 3 normal XFCE wallpapers. We do have Firefox installed, and here is our XFCE terminal. So now I should be able to install any other packages I want using doas. So I'm going to install neofetch and just take a look at the output. And yes, we do want to proceed. And so now neofetch on FreeBSD running in VirtualBox. So that will just about wrap it up. So we have a FreeBSD 12.1 installation with an XFCE desktop, full disk encryption using the ZFS file system, and basically everything is set up to allow you to start using the system. We just need to install some additional software, and that's about it. Now, if you are installing this on actual bare metal hardware and you do have issues, I would recommend consulting the FreeBSD handbook, and they have sections in there that deal with hardware troubleshooting, and there are also other online resources available as well that can help you out with configuring Xorg and those sorts of things should you have problems. I would also highly recommend using the FreeBSD handbook as a comprehensive resource for learning the ins and outs of the FreeBSD operating system. It's excellent documentation. It will remind you somewhat of the Arch Wiki, except instead of being in a wiki format, it's more of like a document or a manual. It has sections, and you can sort of work your way through the installation all the way up through configuring your desktop and your server daemons and all that sort of stuff. So yes, highly recommend the FreeBSD handbook. So we will be taking a look at some additional FreeBSD related topics in the future, but that's all we have for today. Thank you very much for clicking on the video. If you enjoyed this content and would like to see more, please like and subscribe. See you soon.